a bit of housekeeping. Emergency exits are there, follow the green sign if the alarm goes off, nearest exit may be behind you, illuminated trips, all that kind of rubbish. So, all the basic health and safety stuff. There is a cloakroom when you first came in, toilets go straight through that main space. This room is actually called the Queen Charlotte room. This is the room where we will have the panels in the afternoon, the main presentations and the plenary session just to wrap up at the end. If you go through there, past the DevOpsGuys stand, grab a free t-shirt and then go through into what's called the lower sugar room. In the lower sugar room is where we're going to do the workshops. So we've got Gabriel, I think, talking about doing sort of stuff in one-click and Azure. We've got Matt and Manny from DevOpsGuys talking about Octopus Deploy and application deployment, and we've got Dave Wyatt talking PowerShell MVP, talking about DSC and Pester and all the sort of good things PowerShell. If you go through the lower sugar room, in the corner there is another set of stairs, and directly above there is, unsurprisingly, there is called the upper sugar room, and in the upper sugar room it's just a breakout space. So if your PagerDuty goes off, you've got to do some work, you want to take a phone call, you want to just have a breakout session, you want to be interviewed for a job, that's the space that we kind of recommend that you use. Not that recruitment has anything to do with conferences. As you go out here on the wall, there is a little section of white wall there. In there's some nice big post-it notes. If you have any questions for the panels, things you particularly like to talk about, write out a post-it note, a bit like an unconference session, stick it up on the wall, and we'll try and make sure that it gets incorporated in the questions that we ask the panel. We will take some questions from the audience through the session, but as you know, when you're trying to do that, you pass the microphone around and then people take 5 minutes to ask a question and everybody gets bored. So as many of the questions that you can seed in advance also gives the panelists time to have to think about it. Really excited about some of the panels this afternoon. Basically because I think this is one of the first time, Puppet said they don't generally do panels, but they've made an exception for us, which is fantastic. I think it's pretty much the first time you've kind of got Chef, Puppet, PowerShell and John also talking about Ansible all on the one panel. So I'm quite excited about the infrastructure as code panel, as I am with about the CI/CD panel and the sort of what's happening next panel at the end. Got to talk about our sponsors, ScriptRock, Octopus Deploy, AppDynamics, Chocolatey, DevOpsGuys, Redgate, Puppet Chef, Prism Digital and DevOps World. DevOps World's another event that's happening in November, I think. So please obviously support all of our sponsors, take all their free swag, get a coffee mug, get a t-shirt, get a job, and all those sort of good things. So any other Prism guys, anything else you want to say before we kick off?
That's
no?
it.
All good?
Yep.
The other thing, I was just logging out of Outlook and then I was signing out of Skype, so Skype didn't pop up halfway through the conversation. I thought, well, it probably wasn't going to pop up anyway. So I don't know whether does Skype run on Windows. Does anybody know? So I got the job of kind of being the keynote speaker, more of an intro speaker, because I'm trying to set up some of the things I want you guys discussing today. This is not, Velocity Conference, we're not O'Reilly, we're not professional conference speakers, we're practitioners that are out there doing DevOps on Windows and Linux in the real world. And the value that you're going to get out of this conference today is you guys talking to each other, asking good questions, just randomly walking up to people and say, who are you, what do you do, how's your company doing DevOps? So I really kind of want to encourage you to get out there. So the purpose of this talk is really just to give you some things to think about and things to talk about. So about me, I've been doing this for 25 years. I started as a mainframe developer for 4 years and then switched over to doing sort of local area networking with Novell NetWare. Decided I didn't really like Novell NetWare, so I moved on to Windows and Windows for Workgroups, Windows 3.51, all that kind of good stuff. I've been a Windows operations manager, a technical architect. I've worked in financial services. I've worked in telecoms. I've worked in what was pretty much a startup back then. There's some TJ guys in the room. TJ guys. Has Merriman showed up yet? No. Okay, so that's my background. You can tweet me at the Ops Manager if you want to have a conversation. Oh, hashtag WinOps if you want to tweet throughout the day. So, why are we here? Why are we here today? We're here because somebody said that to me. Somebody who used to work for me. And it was, I know he was only being he was being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but there was part that he wasn't as well. And it really pissed me off because we're doing DevOps on Windows for our customers. You're going to hear from Just Eat later today. They're doing DevOps on Windows. We've got WinOpsGuys. They're doing DevOps on Windows. There's plenty of people here who are doing DevOps on Windows. But for the past 5 years, I've been involved in organising the Velocity conference in London, doing the web perf track, picking the speakers and stuff. So I've been pretty much every Velocity in London and Berlin and Barcelona in the last few years. And I can honestly say I think I'm the only person at Velocity Europe who presented from a Windows laptop. You know what I mean? Everybody else was Mac. The whole conversation was open source. Nobody was really interested in talking about Windows at all. And I think that's a shame because 25% of the web is still running on Windows. IIS has 26.52% of the market. So, I think that there is this real sort of bigotry against Windows for running workloads, particularly in a web environment. I would also argue that in an enterprise environment, and I'll talk a bit more about this when I talk a bit more about culture, I think that we would an enterprise environment, we've got these sort of more important workloads running. Certainly I know from my background in financial services was heavily Microsoft. But as I said, there's plenty of startups that are choosing Microsoft stack as well. And I'll come back to that with my final question of the day. So, yes, you can clearly do DevOps on Windows. Microsoft even have their own self-assessment tool to tell you that you can do DevOps on Windows. So if you've never run the Microsoft DevOps self-assessment tool, I think what the subtitle of that thing is up there. It's something about the future of Agile. Moving towards the second decade of Agile is the subtext on there, which is in some ways is a pretty good way to think about DevOps. So let's start with what is DevOps. Hands up if you know what DevOps is. No, seriously, hands up. Hands up, who in this thing knows what DevOps is? Cool. No, put your hands up, nice and low. Who knows what DevOps is? You know what DevOps is? Right, keep your hands up for a second. Keep your hand up if you think your definition of DevOps is the same as the person sitting next to you. Right, okay, that's pretty much what I thought. I asked this question when I presented at QCon, and we asked a number of the speakers that were there. And it was really fantastic because we've got some 5 or 6 different definitions that I'm quickly going to walk through. The best one was from a lady who was presenting, and she came from a test automation background, and her reply was, "I'm a tester, I don't know what DevOps is," which was like, okay, we've got a little bit of work to do in the testing community to spread this. Is anybody from the testing side of the house? 1, 2 people, excellent. Okay, give them lots of love. Because your DevOps pipeline doesn't work without good test automation. That is something blindingly apparent from the work that we're doing with our customers. Unfortunately, sometimes the biggest impediment to moving to a DevOps world is that they've got such a backlog of test automation. That is actually the critical path. Trying to get some decent, if they're not doing TDD and they haven't been doing sort of Selenium and browser automation, that kind of stuff for a long time, the backlog of trying to create the decent regression pack that will enable us to increase our tempo and our cadence of delivery is actually the critical path. Right, so Patrick Dubois, it's a movement. I think it's time for change. Stop wasting money. Let's build great software, systems that scale and last. I agree with that, up to the last point. I think systems should scale. I don't think we're building them to last. I think we're building them so that we can replace them quickly and easily and transparently. We're building them in a modular way. We can take stuff in, we can rip and replace. So it lasts in that the system keeps running. a bit like the human body. Every 7 years or whatever it is, there's not every single cell in your body is largely been replaced. So you'd be building a system that lasts, but because it's being continually renewed, continually refreshed, continually changed. So Matt's skeleton. Some of you probably been to Pipeline Conf, probably going to be going to operability.io later in the week. Highly effective daily collaboration between developers and operations people, relevant working systems. Again, I like this one particularly because it's got a bit here about relevant and working. I did mention that I've worked in financial services for a long time. I think I specialised in developing irrelevant working systems. Build it and they will come, and then it sits there for 2 years and then nobody comes, so you take it all out and then you ignore the fact that they spent £25 million building a system that nobody actually wanted. So again, this is the lean part, making it relevant, making sure that you're building something that somebody wants. Anna Shipman from GDS, technical architect, presented at quite a few conferences. Talks about a culture where engineers communicate and work together. Yeah, not bad, not bad. I think a culture where hopefully the business and the engineers communicate and work together would be probably a better definition. But again, it's all about communication, collaboration, working together. My favourite definition of DevOps is probably this one. So John Vincent Lucis, DevOps means giving a shit. It really is a challenge to a lot of people, who've been in the industry for a long time. I mean, I know a lot of people who've been leaving the industry because they were ground down by the sheer siloed nature of living in a print to an ITIL world where you were they wanted to be holistic, they wanted to look at the big picture, they wanted to care, they wanted to be involved in more stuff, but they were told, no, you're a Linux systems administrator, or you're a DBA, or you're a developer, or you're this, or you're that. Stay in your pigeonhole, don't rock the boat, ignore the fact that this whole system sucks, this whole methodology sucks, ignore the fact that your outsourcing partner sucks, all that kind of stuff. And this is about, about giving a shit, learning all the parts, this is about this idea of holistic thinking, think about the big picture, systems thinking, and I think, people need to work together and not just occupy a space. I think that's very good. I think you need to talk. I do think that there are some times when we're in the office and we send a Slack message from one side of the desk to the other. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But I think focusing on understanding enough about the other guy's space to be able to have a meaningful conversation. I don't think everybody's supposed to be an expert on everything. I think this idea of, you've heard the idea of T-shaped people? It's the idea that you have somebody who's got a broad range of skills across the top, but is sort of deep in one specialist subject area. How broad and how deep their breadth goes versus the T-shaped, the vertical part of the T is a question for your organisation. This idea that you're going to staff your entire DevOps organisation up with DevOps unicorns, and the DevOps unicorns are going to be all singing, all dancing, full stack developers. I'm sorry, but I haven't met we've got SQL MVPs in the room. I know I've never met a developer that knows as much about SQL Server as that. I know there's lots of really good devs in the room who've got a really good understanding of IIS, but there's plenty of other people I know on an operations side have got a much better understanding of IIS or a much better understanding of Linux, and vice versa. Got a lot of our guys that are good operations people and they've got a good knowledge of .NET, solid knowledge of PowerShell. Do they have a knowledge of .NET to the depth of somebody who's just been doing .NET C# development for 15 years? No, they don't. We shouldn't expect them to. And if you have an expectation that the people are going to be, have that sort of, I'm going to be all singing, I'm going to be all dancing, I think that's a mistake. So you've got to be careful with your understanding how your organisation structure looks. So, DevOps. Who's familiar with the CALMS model of DevOps? You've heard CALMS? So a lot of you, is that saying most of you haven't heard of CALMS? Okay, that's interesting. If you're coming from the DevOps space, pretty much most of the presentations that you'll see will mention this as somewhere along the way. culture, automation, lean, measurements and sharing, or measurements or metrics and sharing. So the idea of DevOps is about a culture of experimentation, culture of learning, culture of being open to new ideas, culture of being a little bit less risk averse, or being more willing to embrace risk, more focusing on value and delivery. Automation, obviously, key part, getting all that technology right, building your continuous delivery pipeline. Lean is this bit about relevant systems. Only build the stuff that you need to build, focus on user value, focus on getting the customer's need, all that stuff about eliminating waste. Don't do the stuff you don't need to do, Muda, Muri, all those sort of ideas from Japanese Toyota production system, those kind of things. Measurement, I guess measurement on one level is about metrics. It's about having operations and having Logstash and collecting all this data and pulling all this information together. On one level, measurement is about making sure that the decisions that you make are driven by data, not what's called the hippo principle. A decision gets made because of the most highly placed person's opinion. And to be brutally honest, in most of the organisations I've worked at, you were told to go away and do a technical evaluation and come back with the decision that says that this vendor gets selected, or this product gets selected, or you do a business case to whether we should develop X, Y, and Z, and the business case doesn't stack up, but you're told that the IT director or a senior manager wants it, so therefore you have to add some sort of fudge factor to make the business case look sensible. All of those are sort of, I see a few people nodding, so the people who work in enterprise organisations, or people who are working startup and they're going, well, what's an IT director? So that's the kind of model of where we are. How do we get driven by metrics, get driven by real data and real people and real information? Absolutely key. Really, really hard to do. Most companies that we deal with are struggling to understand what's the key metrics they need to know. Cycle time is the obvious one. How quickly we can get data through the pipeline, software through the pipeline. There's classic ones like uptime, but you want to talk about business value, you want to talk about revenue, or whatever the business drivers. I mean, again, particularly when I was working in financial services, I didn't understand the business model of the section of the company I was working in. I literally, if you asked me how that company made money, I said I couldn't tell you. Total Jobs, working at Total Jobs was fantastic. We helped people get jobs. So our metrics were the number of candidates, the number of job ads, the number of applications, amount of money we could rip out of recruiters. I mean, it was fantastic. It was a real clear value stream. Times Educational Supplement was all about ad driven. So it was the number of teachers that were registered, the number of job ads we had, again, number of articles we had. It was like a newspaper. That was great. So we had some real metrics that were really key and relevant to our organisation. And I think a challenge to IT as a whole is if you don't know how your organisation makes money, what your business model is, and what are the metrics that really drive your company or organisation forward, that's part of the conversation that you've got to have about measurements and metrics. It's not just a conversation around CPU utilisation or average transaction latency or ping time or whatever, although all those things are important. And the last one is about sharing, which came out in some of the definitions. It's about collaboration, it's about sharing, it's about giving a shit, it's about not just occupying space, it's about talking to people. It's about calling bullshit in another 3-hour meeting where you're going around and around and around, because people don't want to try and they're too busy defending their turf and not moving people forward. So I think the key thing for me, I'm just checking the time. I think the key thing for me about that, when I look at this list about DevOps in a Windows world, to be brutally honest, there's only one area in that for me is actually OS specific. The way you do automation in a Windows environment is different to the way you do automation in a Linux environment. Although we're going to have a conversation with Puppet, Chef and Ansible and everybody else later on who are going to say, no, we're all cross-platform. But the underlying mechanisms are different, and there's a different approach and there's a different style. And that's the area probably where Windows is different. Most of the rest of the stuff is irrelevant to whether you're running on Windows or Linux. Okay? You might be using slightly different tools to support your support your sharing and collaboration. You might be using SharePoint instead of using Atlassian Confluence or something. You might be using SCOM if you're a masochist. Instead of using some of the other open source products. You are going to have a different culture. I'm not saying that the end culture you might want to ask, go for, or target is going to be different. The culture inside your organisation will be very different. And I'm going to come back to talk about culture. Before we sort of leave the tech track, I'm not really going to talk about tech too much. I'm going to talk about one thing. In fact, Ed, the Microsoft scripting guy, is going to talk about one thing. At the end of the day, if you're going to do DevOps on Windows for the automation piece, you've got to know PowerShell. End of story. If you don't know PowerShell and you consider yourself to be a Windows on the systems administrator side, and I would argue even on the developer side as well, your lifespan of having a successful career is measured in the next few years. It really is, you have to learn PowerShell. Luckily I'm a manager now, so I don't need to know PowerShell. I was talking to Ed on you'll see the comments on YouTube if you look at the video. I've still got a copy of Ed's PowerShell 2.0 book, unread, because I never got around to it. But we've got lots of guys who are experts in PowerShell. We're going to have some really good PowerShell conversations. So Ed, if you're familiar with the scripting guy blog, so who here would say they know PowerShell? Okay, good. Who here would say they're really good at PowerShell? Dave Wyatt, put your hands out. Yeah. Are there any other PowerShell MVPs in the room apart from Dave? No? Okay, good. Alright, so Ed's I've got a little 5-minute video here from Ed that Ed did to us because he couldn't come over this year. Hopefully Ed's actually going to come over next year. So I'm going to run a little video for 5 minutes, very quickly.
Hello, this is Ed Wilson, the Microsoft scripting guy, and this morning I want to talk to you just a little bit about Windows PowerShell. So the cool thing about Windows PowerShell is that we're now in version 5, and so this means that Windows PowerShell has been around for quite a while. So the cool thing about this is that working with Windows PowerShell, one gets to kind of see the future, if you will. So with Windows PowerShell 1, which came out like nearly 7 years ago, it was kind of a little bit like, VB Script. We had common stuff that we could do, but there was WMI. But other than WMI and ADSI, there wasn't really a lot of remoting. Then in Windows PowerShell 2, we added in remoting, we added in a script editor, we added modules and stuff like that. PowerShell 3, we added in, workflow, which was like really cool and gave us a very powerful tool that we could use that could survive reboots and allow us to configure stuff that would work with different things like that. Then 4 gave us desired state configuration, and 5 added in classes and all of that. So what you can see is that with every version of Windows PowerShell, we continue to add new features, and it just keeps getting better and more powerful as we work with this stuff. So, the thing is that, I know I've been doing IT for a while, and, I look at stuff and I think, I can still remember, some of the different things that I learned at Tech Ed that, really never, came about. I mean, they were there, but, they didn't really pan out, or, bear fruit, that wasn't worth my time in trying to learn some of this stuff. But with Windows PowerShell, we're now in version 5, so, we know it's going to be around for a while. We've even seen, betas of, Windows Server 2016, and PowerShell is there as well. So it's just going to keep getting better and better. The thing is, it's time to learn Windows PowerShell. So if you haven't started learning it, you need to, because it's there, whether you're working with Exchange, on premises or in the cloud, whether you're working with SharePoint on premises in the cloud, Active Directory on premises in the cloud, any of our cloud technology, virtualization, containers, nano server, whatever. Windows PowerShell is there, and it's going to, let us continue to work with it and continue to manage this stuff. So yeah, this is stuff that we need to learn. Yeah, and the sooner that you learn it, the better that it'll begin to bear fruit, and B, you'll be ready when the next version and stuff comes around and the new features are added. So with DevOps, it's expected, that we're going to do a little bit of development, and we're going to do some operations. So it's kind of a hybrid approach, if you will. The thing is that with the number of servers that are continuing to grow, and with virtualization that makes it very easy for us to quickly add additional servers, we can't be mouse click, like we used to do 25, 30 years ago when there were one or two servers that were around. Now there's like thousands of servers, and we can spin up several hundred, just like that, or spin down several hundred just like that. Everything's virtualized, and the pace is faster and faster. So we do a little bit of scripting or development, to give us the ability to perform repetitive tasks quickly. And as we do, then we can save that. So the work isn't lost. It just continues to grow, to change, to morph. And we need to be able to do this quickly and efficiently as we go through this stuff. So anyway, I still think it's a little bit funny, when I'm reading on the blog and, or a blog somewhere, and somebody will start off and say, oh, there's this new scripting language from Microsoft. Dude, it's been around for like over 7 years. So yeah, it may have been, a long time ago. I mean, 7 years is a long time anyway. If you think about it in internet years or even doggy years, I mean, it's like, dude, that's a long time. And so, yeah. You're not going to get away from it. It's there, and you're going to continue to see it. And there's a lot of really cool, exciting things that just continues to show and continues to be around. So, what is PowerShell? Dude, it's there. It's for the win. Embrace it. So, I'm Ed Wilson, Microsoft Scripting Guy, and I hope you're having a wonderful day.
It's just like, dude.